In late June 1903, 7-year-old newsboy Little Richard Tebbets went missing during his morning rounds selling papers in Rockford, Illinois. 8 days later, his small body was found by a Milwaukee Railroad crew foreman, beaten and mutilated, discarded in a farmer's field nearby train tracks. Welcome to an audio version of an original article by Kathi Kresol, operator of Haunted Rockford Paranormal Events, Rockford, Illinois. This audio presentation is entitled Inhuman Monster and contains the 2015 story of the same name. The story originally appeared in Murder Mayhem in Rockford, Illinois by Kathi Kresol. This audio article is produced by Thomas Saunders for Haunted Rockford. Little Richard Tebbets lived in Rockford in the early 1900s. His life was not an easy one. His parents divorced, and his mother had to struggle to support her 5 children. She worked as a cook at a few of the local hotels, like the Chick House and the Jarvis Hotel. But Richard, or Little Dick, as most people knew him, made the most of it. He was very tiny for his age of 7 years, but because of his family circumstances, he was well known throughout the city. Dick started working as a newsboy when he was just 4 years old. The newspaper was so proud of the little boy that it even did a story about him. It mentioned that he would use some of his hard-earned money to buy new clothes for himself. Dick would then wear them so proudly. He looked like a little king as he showed them off. Dick was very popular with reporters and customers alike. He was known for being a hard worker. Dick would show up for work very early in the morning to get his newspapers and enthusiastically set out on his route. He always came back in the late afternoon for the paper's second run of the day. When he first started to sell the papers, he was so small that his newsboy's bag would drag along the ground while he walked around yelling out headlines. People were impressed with the little boy's enthusiasm and his attitude. The men who knew him thought he was going to make a name for himself. In their opinion, Dick was going to be another Armour or Rockefeller. On June 22, 1903, Dick was at the office bright and early to pick up the newspapers and start his day. The men in the newspaper office noticed when he did not come back for the second round of the papers that afternoon. They were used to him returning early and sitting down to visit with them. Everyone enjoyed talking to the bright little boy. When he did not return home that evening, his mother sent the other children to look for him. They searched all the places where Dick was known to go. Everyone knew something was wrong when he did not show up at the newspaper office the next morning. It was so unlike the little boy to miss work. His family was frantically looking for him. Their greatest fear was that he might have fallen in the river. He was so small they were all afraid that if he did fall into the river, he would be unable to climb back out again. The police became involved when he still had not returned by the next morning. Everyone was trying to find out where Dick was last seen. Some men who worked the railroad yards knew Dick and reported that they had seen him down by the tracks with a strange man. They noticed this man around for a few days prior to the disappearance. He was with another young boy, and they both had gone under the train viaduct. The men then heard the young boy calling for help. The boy broke free from the man and ran to the railroad workers to tell them what the strange man had requested. The railroad men chased the stranger until they lost him. This incident took place the day before Dick went missing. In 1903, the city had a large racing park called Rockford Driving Park. It was used for horse races in the beginning. Then, as transportation advanced, it was also used for motorcycle and car races. The park was located on the west side of the river, close to the present-day Welsh School. On June 30th, men were working on the Milwaukee Railroad by the driving park entrance located near the intersection of Adolphson Road and Huffman Boulevard. It was around 2 p.m., and the section foreman, Christian Hayer, was talking to a farmer whose field was by the train tracks when he noticed something in the grass. He walked closer and was at first confused by what he saw. It took a moment for his brain to comprehend what he was actually seeing. He quickly backed away. The mysterious disappearance of the little boy had been solved in the most horrible way. Chief Bargren and Coroner Frank Marsh arrived on the scene about the same time. The 2 seasoned professionals were sickened by the sight that lay before them. The tiny body of Dick Tebbets was lying on his back and was horribly mutilated. He was naked except for his shirt, which was bunched up around his chest. His pants were a few feet away from the body, and his newspaper bag lay on the other side. His suspenders were wrapped around one of his wrists. Several clues were evident at the scene. There were unsold papers that were dated June 22nd, the day Dick had last been seen. There were pennies and nickels that must have been from sales scattered on the ground, and there was a small bag of candy inside the newspaper bag. Chief Bargain gently removed the gag from the boy's mouth, and several of his teeth came with it. The child had been beaten and cut with a brutality that neither the chief nor coroner had ever seen. Coroner Marsh tenderly wrapped the tiny body in a sheet and transported it to his undertaking rooms on South First Street to prepare it for an inquest. E.S. Tebbets, the boy's uncle, identified the body to spare both of the parents from seeing the awful condition of their son. Dr. Tweet, who knew Dick, also identified him. Dr. Tweet also conducted the examination of the boy's body. He declared that the body had been mutilated by a very sharp knife. Dr. Tweet also testified that the state of decomposition led him to believe that Dick had been killed on June 22nd, 8 days prior to being found. Dick's father, A.L. Tebbets, testified about the separation between the parents years previously. He did not live with the rest of the family, but stayed in a boarding house at 718 Elm Street. He told the jury the details of the search the family had made all through Rockford, Belvedere, and Marengo. The mother spoke next. She testified that she did not see Dick on June 22nd because he was sleeping when she left for work, but her daughter had seen the little boy around 7 o'clock in the morning selling papers on the street. The devastated mother told the jury of the last time she had seen the child. He was speeding through his prayers the night before his disappearance, and she chastised him. "All white, Mama," he said before starting them over. These words were the last he ever spoke to her. The mother's grief was almost too much for spectators to bear. Because of the state of the body, it couldn't be kept any longer, and his remains were buried the same evening. His family and a few friends were able to attend the funeral at Greenwood Cemetery. A few days after Dick's body was discovered, a little boy in nearby Beloit, Wisconsin, reported to police that he had escaped from a man who matched the description of the man who was chased by the railroad men some days earlier in Rockford. In August, Rockford headlines blared the news that 2 more boys had been found murdered, their bodies left in the same condition as Dick's. The latest one was in Detroit, Michigan. The little boy had been identified as Alphonse Whelms, who had left his home to go play with a cousin. The 4-year-old's body was found horribly mutilated. Detroit police were able to move quickly and arrested a man known as Charles Price, though his real name was Emil Waltz. The Detroit police sent a picture of Waltz to Chief Bargain, who showed it to the men who had claimed to see Dick with a stranger. Emil Waltz was 40 years old. He was 6 feet tall and 190 pounds, and had a medium build, sandy hair, and blue eyes. He had scars from gunshot wounds above both knees and on the left side of his chest. Waltz had previously been arrested in Michigan for grand larceny and served time in Ohio and Michigan prisons, including a charge for manslaughter. Waltz traveled to Toledo, where he was arrested and returned to Detroit. While Waltz claimed to be innocent of the murders, he did verify that he was in Rockford during the time Dick was murdered. Police checked into Waltz's story and found out that he was in Rockford using the alias Ole Walters. He stayed at the home of John Lindstrom and worked at the Forest City Furniture Company between June 14th and June 20th. Lindstrom reported to police that Walters left his house without paying his rent on June 22nd, the day that Dick was killed. After a 6-week trial, Waltz was found guilty of the murder of Alphonse Whelms and sentenced to life in prison. He was sent to the penitentiary in Marquette, Michigan. Waltz was not intimidated by incarceration and would constantly break rules and challenge authority. His anger, constant taunting, and physical attacks kept the other prisoners and the guards on edge. Once, Waltz was somehow able to purchase liquor and later attacked another prisoner with a large knife. Authorities were unable to discover where he had acquired the knife. They did, however, find that he had bought the liquor from one of the guards. The deputy involved was suspended. On July 23, 1905, Waltz was again in trouble for breaking a rule. When he was taken to the office to be reprimanded, he defied the guards and then pulled a large knife from under his shirt and threatened them with it. One of the guards, Deputy Catlin, grabbed a nearby wooden chair and was going to use it against Waltz. Waltz lunged toward the guard, but instead of attacking him with the knife, he belted out a wild yell and then plunged the knife into his own side. The man suspected in Dick's death died without confessing to his murder. The arrest of the child killer gave Rockford some relief, even though he was never charged with the death of little Dick. His death left many questions unanswered. The main one was what compelled this man to murder and mutilate little children. Authorities never got their questions answered, though specialists, called alienists at the time, were able to interview Waltz and answer a few. The term pedophile is, unfortunately, more familiar to us now that it was at the turn of the 19th century. But that does not mean that the crimes are any better understood now than they were then. The death of little Dick Tebbets was felt by every citizen in Rockford. This little boy, so well known and remembered for his hard work, enthusiasm, and trusting nature, to many represented all of the children in Rockford. The fact that little Dick could be taken and murdered meant that any child could. The fear that held every parent in its grip had never been experienced at this level in Rockford prior to this little child's death. The fact that a total stranger could hurt one so small was inconceivable. But this would not be the last time that the fear of violence was felt in the city. This is the end of our audio article. Thanks for listening.